to fall in love with the first boy you meet in college. At the beginning of my freshman year, I wholeheartedly believed this. I had just moved away from my friends and family in Oklahoma into my own apartment in Houston. It was the farthest outside my comfort zone I had ever been, and although I was excited to have a fresh start, I was also terrified that I would mess up my entire future. I had overly romanticized expectations about college, but an overly cynical attitude toward romance. It seemed unlikely to me that two people could fall in love at the right time and for the right reasons. Furthermore, it seemed impossible to remain in love forever. One person would eventually say or do something to shatter the other person into irreparable pieces. I intended to avoid love in college, not because I didn't think it existed, but because I knew I wasn't guaranteed a happy ending. I knew what I wanted my happy ending to be. I fantasized about striding across the stage at graduation, head held high, knowing that I had become a wiser, more self-assured, and confident individual. I thought I could accomplish this by completing a checklist. 1, sampling sushi and ethnic food. 2, becoming comfortable driving on a 6-lane highway. 3, traveling abroad. And 4, running around my college campus wearing only shaving cream. Everything except becoming romantically involved. However, in the midst of battling homesickness, struggling to navigate Houston's immense sprawl, and devouring my first bowl of pad thai, I met a boy who made me extremely happy. He was a freshman also, and since we were both awkward and he was only slightly more self-conscious than I was, we both avoided the rowdy weekend parties. Instead, we took walks around campus together, watched movies in his dorm, or just talked until it was late, and afterward he would walk me to my car. Although I hadn't known him long, I found myself telling him about my classes, my friends, and my family back home, even my self-doubts. "You're much braver than I am. You'll be fine," he reassured me, waving these doubts away. Blushing, he added, "I don't know why you hang out with me. I'm really boring and awkward." Although I adored his awkwardness, I wanted to tell him that I saw more than this. He was also the boy that had offered me his shoes when my heels became unbearable. He calmed me down after I quarreled with my parents, and he was my only friend in Houston that listened to, but never judged what I said. Despite my initial wariness, I had fallen hard for him, but far from it feeling like a risky, doomed endeavor, it felt like I was touching ground. One day, I shared these feelings with him. When he hugged me and promised we'd talk about it later, I felt like I had conquered the world. 3 hours later, when he said he didn't have feelings for me, it felt like my world had been turned upside down. Staring at the floor, he asked pleadingly, "Was it something that I did?" As if he were begging me to let him off the hook. Maybe then he wouldn't have to explain why he had chosen to spend several weekends and his birthday with me, but he couldn't choose to be with me now. I never asked him for an explanation. We agreed to remain friends, yet when he began to avoid me soon afterward, I didn't confront him, hoping that he would come around once he realized that he missed me. When he didn't, I began to wonder, was it something I had done? I thought it was my fault for falling in love too fast. When he ignored me while we were in the same room, and I felt like throwing up, I told myself that I should have seen this coming. Like someone who might take a knife to her wrist to control her ability to feel pain, I flogged myself with self-loathing to cope with the fact that nothing was going the way that I had planned. I blamed myself for everything, for his distance, for feeling disoriented, and most of all, for not being the fearless, confident person that I had set out to be. I made more lists with numerals. I wouldn't let boys walk me to my car. I wouldn't tell them about my problems. And never, ever again would I read something into a boy's actions that might lead me to believe that he cared. The next couple of years went more smoothly. I studied in Spain and traveled around Europe. I went streaking on campus. However, these events felt less like items on a checklist and more like fulfilling personal experiences. As a result, I began to gradually let go of some of my rules. Then, I experienced a relapse the spring semester of senior year. There was a graduate student in one of my courses who drew me in with his curly hair and slightly obnoxious habit of arguing with the professor. One day, while I was talking to a friend before class, he interrupted our conversation several times to ask me questions about myself, each time with a sly smile. His behavior seemed strange, and I became even more bewildered when I caught him watching me, and he persisted trying to engage me in conversation. He seemed to be trying to get my attention, but for what purpose? I didn't want to puzzle over what his actions meant. I had just secured a job for the coming fall, and I was now focused on graduation. I didn't want uncertainty. However, I began to look forward to seeing him in class, and I thought about him constantly. I even grew fond of his frequent comments during class discussion. I appreciated how different his abstract way of thinking was from the didactic perspective many of my peers had. While they were concerned with drawing the line between possible and impossible, he spoke about them as if they weren't dichotomies. Despite the fact that my heart did somersaults anytime he looked or smiled at me, the idea of getting to know him better filled me with so much panic that my stomach ached and I felt like I was choking. I tried to forget him, reminding myself that people change their minds often and gestures can be misinterpreted. Then one day before class, I noticed how the sunlight illuminated each individual curl of his hair. I thought about how I initially thought he was obnoxious, but now I admired his tenacious curiosity. Suddenly, my inner turmoil was replaced with peace. It dawned on me that disappointment, in every aspect of life, not just romance, was so common that I could never truly avoid it. My feelings for this boy, however, were not ordinary. I had encountered other boys, yet their hands, eyes, smiles, and hair hadn't moved me like his did. I realized that my insistence on trying to control everything in my life, not my painful experiences, was hurting me. So I did away with all my rules, not because I couldn't get hurt, but because this experience seemed more valuable than any guarantee of a happy ending. When he casually mentioned one day that he was married, I cried the entire way home. At first, I wondered bitterly what the point had been. Why, once again, had I fallen for someone who could never be mine? After several weeks, however, I began to see that just as I had to let go of my rules and need for control in order to love that curly-haired, slightly obnoxious boy, I now had to let him go in order to avoid repeating the mistakes that I had made in the past. As a freshman, I had tried desperately to get one boy to like me, but as a senior, I was now the one creating the distance. When he continued to watch me in class, I ignored him. When he stood so close that he brushed against me, I walked to the other side of the room. Where I had remained silent when the first boy asked me if he had done something wrong, I didn't wait for this one to ask. I want to give you the benefit of the doubt, but I feel like you've been flirting with me, I told him at the end of the semester. I added with a touch of sarcasm, I thought you should know because someone else might take advantage. Although I hid my true feelings from him, I couldn't lie to myself. I still caught myself watching him sometimes, his head bent over his notebook and his curls falling to the side, wanting to touch the side of his face, almost wanting him to look up, but glad that he didn't. In class, I still enjoyed listening to him think out loud. I admired the fact that even though he wasn't always right, he kept trying anyway. After all, how does anyone get anything right the first time? I myself was finally beginning to understand how crucial mistakes were for growth. I realized that I did several things in college that, as a freshman, I vowed to avoid. I fell in love during inopportune times when I was most vulnerable and perhaps with the wrong boys. There were moments where fear prevented me from saying the right thing at the right time. However, I also know that all of these experiences made me into the person who walked across the stage on graduation day, her head held high, certain that she had become a wiser, more self-assured, and confident person. I got my happy ending after all.